UK economy, or bits of it, have been growing for quite some time. If you look at manufacturing, for example, and construction, they have been on an upward trend since the summer, since early summer 2020. What had lagged behind was services. And what the latest data is telling us is that finally the retail sector, consumer spending generally, is picking up. And some of the money that people had saved is now finally being used to buy goods and services that we weren't able to do before. And that will accelerate inevitably as more restrictions are lifted.
So those are some of the bright spots, but these numbers don't disguise the damage in other areas, like trade.
Absolutely. I think we've had, of course, Brexit, which has affected trade, certainly for a while at the turn of the year. The end of the transition period has meant that quite a lot of restrictions have come into place in terms of checks and paperwork that needed to be completed, and that has affected trade. There is no doubt that that is going to be an issue. But trade, manufacturing trade more generally, has done reasonably well. And of course, we have been helped by the fact that the US and China have been growing, quite solidly for quite some time, and world trade is picking up. Yes, of course, it fell in 2020, less than people had expected, but it's certainly now showing signs of, in fact, accelerating in the positive direction. So that's been helpful. But yes, there are still sectors that are affected right now as we come out of this, the entire travel industry. Airlines, we've seen, of course, they haven't been able to have the passenger numbers they had before. Airports have suffered, but also the entire sort of tourism area on which the UK and others depend quite a lot.
What do you think the impact's going to be then of further easing of lockdown, of reopening up the economy?
We're already seeing that there is a substantial bounce back taking place. A lot of pent-up demand there. Everyone's been talking about this, but there are signs now that this is coming. Of course, we have to remember that a year ago we saw a very sharp fall in the early summer. And of course, if you look at the data now on a year-on-year basis, we'll be doing reasonably well. But for the moment, if you just look at the March data, we're still about 6% below where we were pre-pandemic. So if you compare it with February 2020, I think we're going to see that gap closing quite quickly. The expectations are that by the end of this year, with a bit of luck, we will have recovered back to February 2020 levels. What will happen after, of course, is a big question mark, because investment has been weak. We saw that actually in the quarterly data that just came out. How you get that to recover, the government has put huge amounts of money into the economy, both in terms of fiscal expansion and also monetary easing. And it's also supporting now investments through all sorts of new measures. Let's hope they work, because without that, we won't get back to growth rates that should at least cover the fact that we would have had, by the end of this year, practically 2 years of no growth if you add the two together. And that, of course, is something that needs to be made up. Will it be made up? And a lot hangs in the balance.
How does the UK compare to other G7 economies? I mean, looking at the Q1 numbers, that they're lagging behind the US, Germany, France, even Italy.
What we've seen, of course, is that the UK, mainly because it's been so dependent on services, saw a much sharper fall in 2020. The result is, of course, that it's probably going to see a sharper recovery to make up for that fall. So if you just do the maths, obviously, if you fall very sharply, even if you don't grow at all, your year-on-year position is going to be considerably better than perhaps some of the other countries will find when they calculate their data. What matters is whether that recovery is sustained. If we go back to just growing very, very gently in the future, then obviously we won't be able to make up what we lost. But I think in the end, we'll probably see that countries come out back to pre-pandemic levels, including the UK, at more or less the same point in the month